Welcome all to the Dyson School of Design Engineering. My name is Rafael Calvo. I'm a professor and director for research at the school. And it is a pleasure to host you and, of course, our very special guest today. This is our fourth seminar in this series, and we will normally welcome you to our building, or at least our large lecture theaters at the university. But today's speaker has drawn over 2,000 registrations, so we will really need like a London Stadium, or at least the Royal Albert Hall that is just down the road in our school. We are the youngest school at Imperial College and have been operating since 2014. And since this talk is about the future of design education, I will briefly show you what the present looks like at our school. Our oldest teaching program is actually a double master's that predates the school and is run with the Royal College of Arts. This is the Master's in Innovation Design Engineering. And this year we celebrate 40th birthday. And as you can see here, the program has been very successful at many levels. We have over 700 graduates, and we have had over 100 very impactful startups created by these alumni. Our other joint program with the RCA is the Global Innovation Design. For this one, students learn to tackle global challenges by studying, living, and working in various countries. This includes a term that they spend at Keio University in Tokyo or Tsinghua University in Beijing. They can choose. And another one in the Pratt Institute in New York or the Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. But our largest degree is a 4-year undergraduate and master's in design engineering. In addition, we have a growing PhD program with over 70 students. As you know, PhD programs in design are evolving all over the world. Each school has its own style, and we learn from each other, for example, through conversations like the one we will have today. And as part of this, we are also a founding member of the Docs for Design, the PhD in Design Network of Excellence dedicated to improving PhD education in design worldwide. Our staff and students work at the intersection of design, engineering, and science in a purpose-driven and interdisciplinary way. In our school, we are currently tackling 4 global challenge areas: the future of mobility, health and aging, sustainable growth, AI, and data. From the over 2,000 people who have registered to this talk, we receive over 100 questions, and we have grouped them by theme. And I will go through as many as I can with Don. It might sound like a cliche, really, but our guest, Don Norman, really doesn't need an introduction. However, here are 6 highlights I can't really help but mention. He is a former vice president at Apple, co-founder emeritus at the Nielsen Norman Group, founding director of the Design Lab at the University of California, San Diego, recipient of many awards, including the SIGCHI Lifetime Achievement Award. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering and author of 20 books that have been translated to at least 20 languages. Welcome, Don. I think you're muted, Don.
Technology defeats me again. I was muted. Anyway, I'm pleased to be here. I'm pleased to see so many people from all around the world, almost every continent, maybe every continent, except Antarctica. So let's begin.
Well, thank you, Don. It's wonderful to have you here. And I didn't spend too much time listing your many achievements, mostly because I wanted you to tell us about your journey in your own words. Since we are going to speak about your views on the future of design education, we would we would love to hear a little bit about how you got to this perspective, no? So maybe don't, to understand, I know that you studied electrical engineering. So maybe would you mind sharing your story about how you became a designer?
Everything I've done has been an accident. And accidents are very powerful. And so what you want to do is when something unknown or something unusual is offered to you, take it. So I started off being very much interested in mechanical things, and then I discovered electronics, where it was invisible things, and how it worked was really fascinating to me. So I went to MIT and got a degree in electrical engineering. And then I went to the University of Pennsylvania because that's where computers had been developed in the United States, the first computers in the United States. And I wanted to study computers. And I went to the electrical engineering department there, and they weren't teaching computers. The people who had invented the computers there had all left. And so I got a master's degree in electrical engineering, but I didn't want to continue. I wanted to do computers. And they said, stay, stay. In a couple of years, you could be the very first computer science student. But just then, I heard a talk by the new chair of the Department of Psychology. And he was a physicist. And his talk was really interesting. And I said, oh, instead of building intelligent machines, maybe I'll study intelligent machines, namely the human brain, human mind. And so I went to Bob Bush and told him my interest. And he said, you don't know anything at all about psychology. And I said, that's right. And he said, good, wonderful. And so I joined the psychology department because he was starting a new discipline called mathematical psychology. And so I was the first student in that new discipline. And I did my PhD thesis in a field called psychoacoustics, which is basically hearing. And so I became quite expert in the sensory systems, especially vision and sound. But notice, still no people. I hadn't been studying people at all. And I got my first job at Harvard. And I was introduced to the faculty in the psychology department at Harvard. And then the most famous psychologist of the 20th century, B.F. Skinner, stood up after I was introduced. He stood up and he denounced me and what I was working on. You're welcome to the academic world. That's because I was interested in understanding the mind and how it worked. And he said, if you can't see it, you can't measure it, and you can't study it. He was a behaviorist, and thank goodness behaviorism is dead today. In fact, when he died, I wrote his obituary. I was asked to, and I said, he was the most important psychologist of the 20th century. He set the field back more than any other individual. And I'm pleased to say that today, the understanding human behavior and understanding the human mind and understanding how we cannot separate the mind from the body, from the environment, because we interact with the environment, that's the major theme. And you'll hear more about that. Anyway, after Harvard, I went to the newly opened campus in San Diego, the University of California, San Diego. There were probably about 100 faculty there. No students had yet graduated. And I joined the psychology department in the second year of its existence and started in what we called human information processing. And I wrote a textbook called, well, here it is. Human information processing, which really changed the way psychology was taught and understood. Because it used to be you just memorized experiments. And what we did is we showed you there were some fundamental principles. And that has guided me ever since. And I won't go into too much detail, but basically I started doing studies in the errors that people make. And just then I was called in by the Nuclear Regulatory Committee because the United States had just had a major nuclear power accident. It was called 3 Mile Island. And it actually was the accident that stopped all the nuclear power in the entire country. And it still hasn't resumed. And I was called in with a group of other people from the human factors field to say, how come the operators were so stupid? Why didn't they catch the error? Why did they keep going? It took them 2 days to figure out what was wrong. And we studied it and we said, no, the operators did a really good job. They did the best job you could imagine. But the plant, a nuclear power plant has 4,000 controls and displays. And it was designed as if to cause errors. If you wanted to cause people to make errors, you could not have done a better job. And that made me say, well, that's interesting. My combination of technology and understanding people in psychology, oh, maybe I could work on making things that were easier to understand. And so I went back and I got some research money from NASA, which most people think of as space, but no, NA is National Aeronautics, and then SA is Space Administration. So I studied errors in aircraft, so aviation accidents. And that was really formative in me. And that got me more and more interested in applying all the work I had done. And so in 1993, I retired. There was an early retirement program, and I took it. And I retired, and I went to Apple and became a vice president of the Advanced Technology Group. And there I was able to talk about how we actually should design computer systems so people could understand them. And prior to that, I had written a book with my research group called User-Centered System Design, User-Centered, UC, System Design, SD, my university, UCSD. But it was also the first use of the term user-centered, or one of the very first uses. And system design has become even more important today. So we look at people and we make sure we understand the entire system. And at Apple, I started what was called the User Experience Architect's Office. And I started off calling myself the User Experience Architect of Apple. And that was the first use of the term user experience. And by that, we meant the entire experience, about hearing about a product, about finding it in the store, about trying to understand it, about taking the box and seeing if it fits in your car, about unpacking it, starting it up, all that. Today, user experience seems to mean, oh, I made a website. No, that's all wrong. But mind you, just before I went to Apple, I spent a year in sabbatical in England, Cambridge, England. And I couldn't work the water faucets, or as they call them, water taps. And I couldn't work the light switches. And I had trouble with doors. I kept pushing and pulling when you're supposed to slide, or even in one case, lift up. How are you supposed to know? And so, although I went on a sabbatical just to enjoy myself and meet new people, I sat down and wrote a book, which is today known as The Design of Everyday Things. And so actually, despite the fact that I've done years of fundamental research in psychological principles and how the people think and so on, I'm famous for doors you can't open, Norman doors, they're called. But it was at Apple where I first met real designers. And so I worked a lot with the design group, and we started our own user experience, user interface group. Those were two different groups, by the way, they didn't combine. But that was my first introduction to design. And ever since that time, I've been more and more involved in design, so much so that today I say I am a designer. I design interaction, I design experiences, and most important of all, I teach. I teach through my students and the several universities I've worked at, and I teach through my books. And that's what I'm most proud of. If you really want to know what is it I'm most proud of that I've accomplished, it's all the people that I've interacted with and changed them. So one of the nice things that I like about the design of everyday things is how many people come to me and say, oh, I read that book and I stopped the course I was taking. I was going to be doing biology. I was going to be doing architecture. I was going to be doing this, that, or the other. And I decided to do design. And the other lesson that you learn from that book is if you make an error, it's not your fault. Most of the time, it's bad design. So that's my background.
Thank you, Don. And it's a fantastic legacy. And the world has changed so much really during your career. How do you think the design has evolved over this period?
Dramatically. Design used to be primarily making nice, wonderful physical products. A really good example today is an Apple computer, where Johnny Ive was the industrial designer who designed them. I used to work with Johnny when I was at Apple. And he's brilliant about making these wonderful physical devices. They're wonderful, beautiful. However, you may have noticed they're getting harder and harder to use because as an industrial designer, he does not understand people. In fact, if you take a look at the iPhone and the tablets, uh, text, words, they're ugly. So basically, you don't have any words. So on the iPhone, there's no menus. No, they're ugly. There are no words. It's all, and if there have to be words, they make them in very tiny print and very low contrast, so you can't read them anyway. So somehow it's supposed to be so easy that you simply move your fingers and make gestures. And well, do I do it with one finger or two fingers or three fingers? Or do I tap twice? Or do I tap and hold? Or do I go up? Or do I go down or left or right? Or maybe I have to go down, but I have to start part of the way from the top and stop before I reach the bottom. These are all gestures that are possible and have meanings in the iPhone, and who can remember them?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what has happened is we have now have many different kinds of designers. And most important of all in today's world, well, let me give you another little story. In 1971, a famous designer, Victor Papanak, wrote a book called Design for the Real World. And he said the first sentence of his book was, "There is no field more dangerous than design." And why did he say that? He said because designers build all this crap that destroys the environment in mining to get the materials, destroys the environment in manufacturing, destroys the environment in usage, and destroys the environment when you throw the stuff away. I've been to India and seen these huge piles of electronic junk. It's a mountain that's burning and emitting poisonous fumes. Why are we doing that? And so design has become very powerful, and it's much more than making a pretty project today, because when I do design, I work in public health. I try to make people healthier. I try to improve education. I try to improve the distribution of food. Those are not making physical products. Those are making people's lives better. And that's, I think, the future of design.
And I think it's a nice segue. I wanted to ask you about a paper you wrote recently about the future of design education. And there you mentioned 11 challenges, grouped in different categories, in 4 categories. One of them were the global challenges that you just mentioned. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about these challenges.
Well, the real point is that design started as a tool of industry. Some of the very earliest designers were in England in the 1700s in the Wedgwood pottery factory, which made dinnerware, which they called China, by the way, because a lot of it came from China, a lot of the original ideas. And they employed designers who designed and made available for the first time by mass manufacturing and specialization, they made available really nice china for everyday people. It used to be reserved for the royalty. People could afford it because every little piece was made by hand. But they introduced mass manufacturing, and they separated the design from the making. And that was one of the first times that had happened. And so that's the beginning of design as a tool for industry to sell more products. And we have to change that. First of all, industry is making things that are harmful. So actually, we ought to be saying to industry, no, that's not how we should make it. Well, we can't do that unless we get to a higher position in the companies. Most designers are at the middle level. They have to do what their bosses tell them or their client tells them. And so we have to change the education of designers for many different reasons. First of all, to understand how to apply the work we're doing, not just to physical products, but to other kinds of products like services. And service design is really interesting because when you do services like, a restaurant, or when you go to a bank, or when you go to a store for that matter to buy something, there's all sorts of levels. There is what we call the front stage, the part you see, but there's what we call the backstage, all this invisible operation that's taking place that make it smooth. And so we have to design all of that. And moreover, there's a journey over time. I just can't show you, here's the product. I have to go through the 60 stages as you go through the service and the entire experience. And not only that, but to do it properly, you should do the experience of the customer and the person serving the customer and the people behind the scenes take care of that. So if you really want to make a hospital system better, you need service design. In fact, almost all the new societal issues, service design is really the key, not product design. And
Mhm.
so we have to train people differently. And we have, of course, new materials coming out. And we have new manufacturing methods. And of course, we have artificial intelligence. We have more and more intelligent products that actually makes the design task much better because one of the best use of AI is not to replace people, but to make people plus the tool be able to do even better things than either of them could do by themselves.
Yeah, we
So,
did have a number of questions about that topic. No, people.
so I'll stop and let you go on, but I'll just say one more word,
Yes.
which you will like. There are very few schools that are teaching the kind of skills that are going to be necessary for the future. There's skills in business, there's skills in technology, there's skills about the world. And so I feel that my background, because I had engineering background and psychology background, was wonderful. But I've also been learning about politics. Politics is essential to make these major decisions, and about how business works and so on. And one of the few schools is indeed the joint programs at Imperial College and the Royal College of Art. And if you take a look at what is going there, I think that's kind of the future of design education.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that endorsement. Um, Several listeners have been asking about design expertise. So I think it's a very closely related topic and what that means. For example, one wanted to know whether design thinking will simply become a common way of working or it will remain a specialist job. What are your thoughts on what constitutes design expertise and how this might evolve in the future?
Design thinking has become this big, wonderful thing. But, you know, the modern view of design thinking is very simplified. Uh, it's you sort of take the exciting part of thinking of new ideas and doing brainstorming and creating, and but design thinking by itself is worthless. It doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what you do. And most of the design thinking courses are all about, having fun, generating ideas. But in fact, when you talk to companies that have done it, nothing has happened in the company because you have to do it to make a difference. And you can't just do it in a company without changing the company. So we've argued that you have to do what we call design-driven transformation. So the company understands and the whole company has to be restructured around design. Now, to me, design is a way of thinking. And it's a way of thinking that can be applied to almost any problem. And I'll give you the four fundamentals that I use in my design thinking. And I say this should to be taught along with everything else as a basic fundamental skill for all students, no matter what field they're going into. Um, so the first principle, which actually is not necessary for all people, is you're going to design for people. So you better understand how they're going to react and what people's abilities are and what their resources are. You know, engineers like to say, you know, if it weren't for people, my equipment would. Wow.
Are you
I don't
there?
know. I heard a lot of noise. Um, if it weren't for people, my equipment would work just fine. And no, you're designing it for people. And so if they're not using it right, then you've done a bad job of designing. And then engineers say, well, the people are so stupid. Why are they doing this? And I say, you have to take people the way they are, not the way you want them to be. And that's a real challenge. Now, not all fields of the world require design for people. If I'm designing semiconductors, I don't have to focus so much on the people. But so that one is special for things that people are going to use. The second one is, almost every time somebody comes to me with a problem saying, I need help in designing for that problem, My response is, I'm not going to solve your problem. Never solve the problem you're asked to solve. Ask, why is that a problem? And when you just get the answer about why it's a problem, say, well, why is that? And what you want to do is you want to find the cause of the problem. Because if you just solve the symptoms, well, the problem will come back. And so the other thing is solve the correct level of the problem. It has to be as low as you can get and still make a difference. The third thing is that everything's a system. And if you just solve the symptoms or just find even the causes of those symptoms, you may solve that issue, but you may actually make the whole system worse. So you have to realize the implications of making a change here and how it impacts everything else. And finally, because we're dealing with people and societies and cultures, we're not going to get it right. So you have to do a prototype. You have to test, continually be testing and finding out and refining what you're doing based on your observations. In fact, if you make the perfect design, which is exactly what people need, guess what? In a year, it won't be perfect anymore because people will say, oh, this is wonderful. I discovered something else I can do with it. And I can do this and I can do that. And that's wonderful, except it's not so good at doing the other things. So you have to modify. So the perfect design is one that actually requires continual modification. So those are my principles. It's basically focus on the people who are going to be using your stuff. And second, make sure you solve the right level of problem. And third, think of it as a system. And fourth, it's a continual iteration of prototyping, testing, refining. And that can be applied to anything, anything in your life, anything in the world.
One thing that I think it's increasingly important for design, and it's related to the question of expertise, is the pressure that we have to be more trustworthy. Some viewers, for example, have asked whether designers should have a license. Another viewer put it this way: what is the future of design in an ever-changing world where people are increasingly asking for ethical products, where trust in the product goes well beyond safety, for example? So, okay. Yeah.
Those are two separate questions. So let me do the two of them separately. First of all, should designers be licensed? And second of all, how do we get people's trust? And should designers be licensed? Well, design covers an extremely wide range of topics. And I'm afraid that if you would license it, you would have to memorize and pass all sorts of exams about things you would actually never be doing. So my feeling is that licensing should be required only in safety critical applications. And then you might have to get a license. I mean, this is true of engineering, by the way. Most engineers are not licensed. The ones who need licensing are those who work in safety critical fields. And then the license is specific to working in that field. So if I'm working in aviation safety and designing equipment going to be used in airplanes or in automobiles for that matter, I should be licensed. But if I'm going to be doing on new consumer goods, I don't really need a license. Or if I'm going to be trying to help a sanitation system someplace in the world where there's going to be many, many different disciplines there, no, I don't need to be licensed. Because licensing can hold you back if it's done wrong. The second question, trust. You know, the world historically has been filled with colonization, especially from Europe. The European countries basically colonized the world. They took over Britain, took over India, the Netherlands were in the Middle East, not in the Middle East, they were in Indonesia. And we had the French, we had the Belgians, we had basically the Europeans. And I now include the America as a colonizing nation as well. And going into other countries, taking over the governments, trying to instill to them our way of thinking, our way of governance, our way of acting. And moreover, being treated, the people who lived in those countries were treated like second-class citizens when they were colonized. In fact, in many countries, take a look at North and South America, when the Spanish, Portuguese went into South America and Mexico, and when the the English and also the Spanish and the French came into what is now the United States. Oh, this is empty land, we can take it over. Well, it wasn't empty land. There were lots of people living in it. The indigenous people were basically forced out. And so we've lost a lot of very important insights into living in the world. Now, designers, when you're asked to go into, I don't know, India or Africa, and to, oh my goodness, they're suffering hunger, or oh, the plants, they need water, or oh, they need better health care. And the designers go in and we do our design research and we try to understand what the issues are, and we come back and we do our design thinking and we do our ideation and prototyping, and we go back and say, here's your solution. And we wonder why people don't trust us. Because we're colonizing them, we're being aggressive, we're forcing on other people our ideas. And so I think that we have to do is completely change our ways. That when we design things for people, we should be facilitators and mentors and helpers. But when we go into other cultures, the ideas have to come from the people who are living there. And by the way, they don't need to send out anthropologists to study what their problems are. They've lived in their problems. They know their problems. And a lot of them are incredibly creative, and they've already made advances in solving their own problems. And so what we can do is we can say, oh, you need more resources. We can help you get them. And most of the people solving a problem attack the symptoms because they don't have the ability to go deeper and attack the fundamental causes. And that's where we can help. So if we think of ourselves as helping and assisting and mentoring, that's how we get the trust, because the trust is them with themselves. The ideas are that come from the very people that are being helped. That's how you get the trust.
Thank you. That really touches a topic very close to my heart, because I grew up between Argentina and Venezuela. And all South America, like you said, has suffered a lot from different periods of colonization for hundreds of years. I think a part of this issue is also happening within, let's say, the US or the UK, where similar attitudes are being taken in the design of products for minority groups or groups of less power. So it's not just with other countries, but also with particular groups within the own country of the designer. No?
Absolutely. We were asked to help with a health problem in the eastern part of the United States. So we are in California, and this was a problem in Kentucky, in the eastern part. It's called it's a mountain range called Appalachians. Appalachia is how they pronounce it. And the people there are, they're quite isolated. There are mountain roads, sometimes narrow roads that can be snowed in all winter. And they have the highest rates of lung cancer and in the United States. And they also have diabetes. They also have heart problems. And what we decided is we can't help them from California. We did send our anthropologists in, and we did go and we worked with the people, but we worked with the people from the University of Kentucky Medical School. But you know what? The University of Kentucky Medical School is in the western part of Kentucky, and this is the eastern part. And as far as the people living in Appalachia were concerned, those other people from Kentucky were foreigners. So they didn't trust them either. And so what we had to do was work with the local community health workers that already were there. And that project is still going on. But the point is, we are foreigners. Even the doctors in Western Kentucky, even though they were only a couple 100 kilometers away, were foreigners.
On a related subject, all ethical issues can be quite difficult for designers, especially in a world where human wants often clash with environmental needs. And some viewers have asked about the limitations of human-centered design, for example, in relation to environmental concerns. And I know you mentioned Papanek before, that it's a classic example of someone who rose these issues. But what are your thoughts on the role of human-centered design going forward?
So let me reach back. I went to whiteboard and pulled this out. You can't see my whiteboard, but I'm writing a book, and the outline of that book is just right there, which you can't see. It's off camera. Ethics is critically important, and you know what is not taught in any design schools that I know of in the world? Ethics. Is it taught at Imperial College?
Yes, I teach that course, actually. It's called Responsible Engineering, Design, and Innovation.
Good for you. So actually, one of the things I'm involved in is trying to reframe design education. And I had written this paper with Michael Meyer, who was a design executive. He now is teaching in the business school and is a part of the design lab at University of California, San Diego. And we decided, look, we have to really change how education is done, and we talked about how other fields have done it. And IBM, which has a huge design group, it's close to 3,000 designers now at IBM, they said, that's a really wonderful program. Can we help you? And so they are co-sponsoring the program with us. And the World Design Organization said, yeah, we want to co-sponsor too. And so we have IBM, the World Design Organization, the University of California, San Diego. And we asked for volunteers. We have 700 volunteers trying to help us. And so we're organizing this. And as we're doing the different kinds of working groups to spell out what a curriculum might look like, by the way, this is going to be about a 3-year effort. We finished the first year. We're just starting the second. Ethics, we decided, was so important, we should not teach a course in ethics. We should embed ethics in all the courses that are taught.
Yeah.
It's too easy to take a course in ethics and think ethics is something off on the side. And maybe when I'm all finished doing my design, I'll think about the ethical implications. No, you have to think about it all along the way. And ethics is really complex because everybody thinks they know what's right and what's wrong. And they have all sorts of good reasons why this is right and this is wrong and this is evil and that's good. But guess what? They differ in what they think is right or is wrong. The different cultures, they're very, very different, often very sensible, reasonable arguments for what is right and what is wrong. And let me give you a simple example. Which is more important, the individual or the society? And they're both critically important. But in some countries, well, I'll take the United States, the individual rights are considered sort of most important. And people feel that each individual has the right to decide and do the things they want to do as long as they don't harm others. And in other countries, let's take Eastern Asia, it's society that's much more important. And the individual is not as important because if the society doesn't exist and society isn't basically fair as much as possible to everyone, the society will disappear. So which is the correct approach? And they give you conflicting ethical rules as a result. And I think the answer is neither is the correct one because it depends on your point of view. And so ethics is complex because you might have to have very different ethical rules and standards and ways of behaving depending upon the group of people we're interacting with.
Yeah, what we find is that it's really important for students to realize that their values materialize in the objects or products they create, no? Value-sensitive design, amongst other methods, can help you identify the values, your own values and the values of the people you are designing for.
So actually, you asked me about human-centered design. So I typed the word human very broadly to mean everything, anything that impacts people. But I've been soundly criticized for this emphasis on human-centered design. And I recently had a conversation with Leila Agaroglu. She does some really great work on sustainability. She's actually from Australia, but she's done most of her work in London and in New York. And she said to me, this new book you're writing, which I called it Design for a New World. She said, no, why don't you call it Design for Well-Being or Humanistic Design or Designing for the Well-Being of People, for each other and for the planet. And so I liked that statement. And so my tentative design is Design for well-being, for people, for society, and for the planet.
Well, if you might remember, you wrote a column for our book called Positive Computing, Technology for Well-Being and Human Potential.
Yes.
That was a fantastic piece you contribute there.
Well, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and so I'm now trying to put it all together.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
I forgot I had done that, so I better try to find it again.
I can send it to you.
Yeah, send me my paper so I can read it.
Yeah. One of our listeners asked about your vision for democratizing design education globally. And you mentioned it already, but I also heard you in other talks talk about decolonizing design education. Could you tell us a little bit more about your approach to democratizing and decolonizing education? No?
Well, some of the basic framework I've already explained. But let me also say what our project, which is called the Future of Design Education, if you want to look at it, everybody, it's the URL is simply futureofdesigneducation.org. We're not going to tell people what to teach. We're not going to tell people what the curriculum is. We're going to present a bunch of issues about that, courses and values and areas that we think could be covered. But we want every design school around the world to actually look at it and say, well, that isn't for us. Or, yeah, we really like this part and we're going to take that. So we want to give people choices so that there's different schools. First of all, if you just take traditional design schools, they're not capable of teaching all of the material, or they may not even be interested in it. So they can take the stuff they're interested in and do that. And it depends whether you're teaching also PhDs, researchers, or whether you're teaching practitioners who often are going to be doing work. They'll get different kinds of education. And again, I was in Ahmedabad, India, and actually there's in the Institute for Design there, and there are many branches of the Design Institute in India, and each one might have very different foci about the sort of emphasis they want to give about for the people living in their state in India. And so we don't want to tell people what to do. That's the whole point. We want the people to decide, but we want to give some really good examples of possible courses that cover new materials, new concepts, new ways of interacting. And, well, yeah.
Actually, I think these two topics, the one about well-being and the one about decolonizing, are very closely related. We have been studying designing for supporting autonomy, human autonomy. And I think that is an important aspect of decolonizing. And if you look at something like the biomedical ethics framework, that is basically has 4 pillars. One of them is supporting well-being, and the other one is supporting human autonomy. So the concepts come very nicely together, and you can see. So I wonder if you have thought about this in that way. Human autonomy. Actually, in one of your books, you talk about complexity and autonomy. The ability to have more choices, but then the negative aspect of the challenges that introduces because we feel less competent. It becomes more difficult. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, in living with complexity, I said, look, people seem to be against complexity and they want simplicity, and they're wrong. People want things that are understandable, because simplicity is in the head, and so is complicated. It's in the head, and if you understand something, you say it's simple, it's obvious. And if you try to make things physically simple, only have 1 or 2 or 3 controls, no. The complexity of the device you're using has to match the complexity of the task you're trying to do. Otherwise, it becomes really difficult to use. And so, but again, once you understand what's going on, what looks complicated to other people, to you is really straightforward and simple. And I love to give the example of my kitchen. When I go cook, I like to cook, and when I cook in my kitchen, and I know where everything is. There's where the knife. This is where the knives are for cutting. This is where the knife is for eating. This is where the knife is for them. This is the tools. This is that. Everything is where I need it, where I know where it is, it's very, very well designed. But when somebody else who can be like my son, who's also an excellent cook, comes into my kitchen, he's completely confused. He wonders why we have things so badly organized around the kitchen. So what is simple for me and for my wife is complex for a stranger to the kitchen. And so that's a good example of the fact that simplicity means understanding, really. And complexity means, oh, gee, I don't know, I'm lost. What are all these things in the way? And the goal of the designer, since we are making things for many people, is first of all to try to structure it so they understand the structure. But second of all, simplify it by having modes. When I'm doing this, I only show them the stuff that I need to know to do this. And when I'm doing that, I see a different set of things that I need to do that. And so that's what takes something like a general purpose device, like a computer, which has so many thousands, millions even of opportunities and changes and controls. No, no, no. We divide them into small packages where there's only just what you need to do that task.
Your stories about these trade-offs between complexity and autonomy had a big impact on the way we thought about these issues.
If you do it right, you feel like you are in control, and that's what the autonomy is about.
Yes.
People like to think, we all like to be in control of what we're doing, and we're not in control. It's really uncomfortable and uneasy.
Yeah, one of the most studied motivational psychology theories is called self-determination theory, and talks about the importance of autonomy, the importance of competence, and then relatedness as part of designs that support engagement and motivation. So when you describe it that way, you can see all the psychological evidence that supports your experience, no, in design. And in a way, it's related to the question I wanted to ask you next. We had many questions from the audience about AR, VR, AI, and how these things affect the UX process. Things like, how do we tackle this new trend of new technologies? Now, what I wanted to ask you about really is, in particular for AI, and how do you think AI might affect or should affect the way we teach design, the future of design education? Do we need to teach more AI courses? Do we, how do we bring this new type of changes to education?
I think we should think of AI as a tool. And that, after all, the major tool for designers used to be, if you like, a drawing board and maybe a couple of straight edges and what we call a T-square, and either a pen, an India ink pen, or maybe a pencil. And we did teach courses on how to use those tools appropriately. And as the tools got better, and pretty soon we had computers tools for doing drawing, people started to learn and use the computer tools. And the computer tools didn't take away their job, but it made it easier. You could do it faster. You could do, if you did the 3 different views of a device, the computer could automatically give you a 3D perspective and view of it. And it could also do some computations while you're at it. So you're trying to make a device, you want to know if it's strong enough, it can automatically compute that. Or it can even automatically give you the parts list and how much it would cost. And so all these simply makes our jobs easier and makes our jobs better. And AI is no different. We don't need to teach people how to program. Actually, knowing how to program simple things is important, because that's one of the tools we should use for making prototypes and doing things. And moreover, if you want to show an engineer what you're really thinking of, if you could make a simple mock-up that works, it doesn't have to work really well, you just have to show what it looks like. The engineers can understand it better. But AI is a very powerful tool. It can make it better. And it takes away a lot of the drudgery of design, because one of the drudgeries is when you're doing the detailed design, you have to repeat things over and over again and make sure the sketches are just right and in scale and so on. Well, AI can do that for you. And AI can even produce ideas. So some of the generative AI tools that are coming out will actually do the design for you. But let me show you what it does. You have to tell it what the problem is. You have to say, here is the goal, and here are the constraints. And then it starts giving you suggestions. And your job now is a good one. You're the designer. You say, no, that's no good. No more of that. No more of that. Oh, that's an interesting direction. Yeah, do more of that sort of thing. And so you are shaping it. And it may be in the end that you say, none of those are right. And so that way you have to step back and say, let me rethink the problem. Maybe I can change the goals slightly, or maybe I can change the constraints to see if I can get things that are better. So you're still a designer. You aren't doing things by hand. You aren't drawing things, but you're thinking, and you're thinking hard about what is this thing I'm trying to make? How will it be used? What should it look like? What are the important characteristics? And the AI then is doing the grunt work behind the scenes of trying to do things that might maybe satisfy those requirements. So that's a very different way of working than the way we're training people today. But I think it makes us more powerful.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking not just of AI as a tool for designers, but also when designers are involved in the design of intelligent systems, so systems that have AI, because AI brings a whole lot of new ethical tensions, a new sort of issues related to the data that we collect, the way we manipulate it, the way we present it to others. It brings issues about human autonomy and control, because you have designers working for companies, for example, who are now being accused of using design as a way of capturing people's attention or leading people to vote in a particular way, manipulating democracies even. So AI has connotations that are very difficult to understand. And
No,
no. So what is your view about this?
I wouldn't say AI has connotations that are difficult to understand and powerful and can be enabling and disenabling. I would say technology. Replace the word AI with technology. This has always been the case. Look, when we, back in the old days, when we had only everything was physical, everything could be simple to control because you could reach over and turn the knob or pull the lever, and you could even figure out what was going on. And as we started making things electrical, where I know I flip a switch and it happens, well, I didn't understand what was happening. And then we start to label the switches to tell you what's going on, but not everybody can read. Or what happens if I'm blind? Because when I'm blind, I can often work the physical stuff because I just feel, remember where it is, and put my hand out and do it. But as we go to more electrical and then electronic and then computer controlled, and especially when we have touch screens, if you're blind, you have great trouble working with that. And yeah, we can make tools that as you touch, the tool tells you what you're touching and so on. It tells you in voice. But yeah, you see, the tool has already disenabled you if you're blind unless you build compensating factors. Or if you're deaf, you have to replace other things. And so we've always had the problem that technology is not always appropriate for all the people. And moving from one technology to another always disempowered some people, even though it made others more strong. The same with AI. AI, for example, to everyone's surprise, when you train on a bunch of photographs of white males, say, that had trouble with females, or had trouble with people whose skin wasn't the same color as mine, or yours, or whatever. And if you trained on only people with dark skin, well, they wouldn't recognize people with light skin. And we learned those tricks too, and those things, and that AI makes lots of mistakes. But it's early on in the game, and we have to be very sensitive to this because unless the real problem is not AI. The real problem is the testing procedure. So yes, these systems get released with all sorts of horrible biases. Well, that means it wasn't really tested very well. Here's a system that's making loan decisions. But where did it learn what the good loan decisions and bad loan decisions? Well, it learned because it simply had a database of what people had been doing all along. Well, people are horribly biased and prejudiced. And so to train those prejudices into the machine, don't blame the machine, blame the training procedure. So I'm an optimist. I agree with all of the evil and all the harm that these devices are doing. I also agree with how irresponsible it is to let today's versions of artificial intelligence do the complete job. I mean, Tesla, the automobile company, although in the fine print they say, our car, you better keep your hands on the steering wheel, be ready to take over at any moment. Their advertisements imply that the car can drive by itself. And we keep having deaths and accidents over and over again. And Tesla says, oh, it wasn't our fault. The people thought the car could do things by itself, and it can't. They should know better. No, you have to design the equipment so that it will not let you do that. If you aren't watching the road, if you aren't really driving, it stops. And some car manufacturers do that. So it's, again, I don't blame the technology. I blame the way it has been developed, the way it has been tested, and the way it is being used.
But some philosophers think that there is a qualitative difference between AI and data-driven technologies because they tend to centralize power. So because in order to have a successful AI company, you need a lot of data, and power will bring more power. It's similar to what has happened with, for example, nuclear plants. They're considered something that centralizes power because you need a super big safety protocols and so forth, while other energy technologies like solar panels can be more democratic because they can be more distributed. So some people argue that there's a qualitative difference between AI-driven technologies and other, but you disagree, I think.
I disagree. I agree about today's current practice, but I disagree that that's a fundamental limitation because AI is more and more in our cell phones. It can be done for very simple tasks. It will be very modular and flexible. And the same, take nuclear power. I'm a big fan of nuclear power. But the existing plants, they are built on old-fashioned ideas, and they're big and monstrous, and they're not fail-safe. If something fails, it can be dangerous, and we've seen that in Chernobyl. We saw that in Japan. We saw that in the 3 Mile Island of the United States. But those are big, massive plants. Today, we know how to make smaller nuclear power plants so that they could be, instead of one massive plant, it's all distributed. And they're safe. There's ways we know how to make them that they're safe. If anything fails, the plant automatically shuts itself down in a safe way. And so we just have been designing with the wrong philosophy because we designed in the old days that big was better. No, it isn't. Modular is better. We learned that from the internet. The way the internet works, there is no central controlling authority. It's all the intelligence is at the edges in the different devices. And that's a much more flexible scheme. And so I think, again, I agree with your description of the problems, but I disagree with the cause for that. I think it's simply inappropriate design of all the various technologies.
Is it inappropriate, or it's appropriate for the benefit of a group? No, because we have seen increased centralization of power. I mean, the big 5 internet companies, Amazon, Google, etc., have increased their power, if you want, while other non-internet-based companies have seen it reduced. So you could argue that from the business perspective, that has been conducive to success for those companies, well, not for others.
Yes, success for companies is not success for society.
Exactly.
It's better, and so there I blame not the companies, I blame the governments for allowing it to happen. We need to have some controls over the way industry works, and it's better to have a large number of small companies than to have one massive one that, in particularly like a Google, which is dependent upon advertising for its success. That's its only income, really. And that means, oh, well, that's why they sell the information, private information from people, but they don't have to do that. So, yeah, I think it has to do with the economic systems that we have in the world and the way they're being enforced and the way they're being imposed. You know, where did this all come from? It came from Adams' book on the wealth of nations. He was really the first capitalist who laid it all out. And he warned against this. He warned against the power of big industries and big companies and the Indian, what is it, East India Trading Group from England and so on. He warned against that. And so all the things he was afraid of have come to pass. But the problem is, again, well, it's this. Remember, I said we need to learn politics to make a difference. This is a political issue.
Yeah, exactly. I know that you have also suggested that we have to train designers so they are ready to be chief design officers. Chief design officers of large companies, Apple, Google, and many others, will need to understand politics and many other aspects in ethics and so forth. What would you suggest? Well, do they need to learn all these skills? They need to learn about engineering, they need to learn about design and politics and sociology and so many other things. Are all these skills that are required to be a good chief design officer? And how do we teach them?
So by the way, I feel this is important not just for large companies, but for companies in general, that who makes a decision about what the company should be doing, how it should treat its employees and the community in which it works and its customers. That's done at the very top level. In the United States, it's called the C-suite, people who have chief in their title, like chief executive officer. In Europe, we tend to call them managing directors, but it's the same philosophy. So how do the people who are in at that level, what were they trained in? And it turns out you can be trained in almost anything. A lot of engineers, Dyson's a good example of an engineer. Well, an engineer designer, right? People trained in literature, people from the arts. What is required is to be able to take a broad view of things, to understand the whole story, to understand the role of engineering and the role of marketing and the role of sales and the economics, the role of economics. You don't have to be a financial expert, but you should be able to understand a spreadsheet. You should be able to understand a balance sheet. And you need to understand all the different components of your company. And the way that happens is you don't want to train everybody to be a chief design officer. Not everybody wants to be, not everybody should be. But we ought to have more people from the design profession. I was really impressed when I visited Philips in Eindhoven, in the Netherlands, where they have a chief design officer. And so that chief design officer meets with the head of Philips on a regular basis, every week, I think he said. And the chief design officer of Philips actually tells Philips, you know, there's a whole new set of medical products that we think that we could develop that would really change the business. And they're really good, great, wonderful products. And I watched how they were working, and they would spend a year or two doing research on this new concept that they were going to release as a product. It's a wonderful idea. And I was very, very impressed. And it's the rare company that does that. Most companies just make a decision and then they tell the designers, oh, we've started, you have 6 months, and then we have to ship the product. No, they don't have time to do this right. But the way you get up there is you learn. Look, when I was an executive at Apple, we had two kinds of people. We had more than that, but I'll talk about two kinds. One was really good at what they did. They were technologists and they were one of the world's experts in the field that they were working in. And those people were very powerful and very important and essential to our success. The other, they were not as good technically, but they understood how the technology that was being developed by this specialist was relevant to the technology in that specialist. And I remember I was once impressed with this person who came around to my office one day and asked, what are you working on? And he just wanted to get a list of all the things that the advanced technology group was doing. And when he discovered things that sounded interesting, he went over and talked to them. He was from the product companies. And here he was doing is trying to find out all the new things that he could piece together and make something brand new in the product world. That's the sort of person that goes up in the company. It's the sort of person who really takes an interest and knowledge and tries to understand and put it together. And in fact, I had a financial person working for me, and one day he told me he was leaving. Why are you leaving? He said, well, I've been in your group now for 2 years, and I think I understand what you're doing quite well. So I'm moving to one of the product groups because I want to learn how they work, because I want to move up in the company. So in some sense, it's your responsibility, your individual responsibility, if this is what you care about, to learn about business, to learn about marketing, to learn about spreadsheets. I didn't know anything about marketing, so I went to the people in marketing. I said, teach me. I didn't know how to read the balance sheet, so I said, teach me. It's not that hard, by the way, but I went and I asked them to teach me. And if you want to get these skills, you have to have that kind of interest. But you know what? Since so many designers are taught in art schools, artists hate business, hate administration, think the administration is stupid. That's not the right attitude. We are not artists. We are not trying to do something for ourselves. We're trying to do something for humanity. So we have to understand humanity.
When you talk about we need to understand humanity, there seems to be an ethical implication, right? We have as designers an ethical responsibility towards maybe improving the world or having a positive impact. On the other hand, you said before that there's a limit to our responsibilities, and governments should be pushing regulation that limits the power of companies. How do you see those tensions coming, and can we teach skills to our students so they become better world citizens, let's call them?
I think it's by the way we teach the classes, right? That is, we don't teach them as a bunch of skills that are isolated from everything else. Because what's important is how those skills are deployed and what you make of them. And as I was talking earlier about when you're doing societal issues, yeah, well, there's a problem about hunger in Africa, or a lack of water in many parts of the world. So they need wells, so they need sanitation. And we understand that, and we have all these skills that can be applied, but what's critically important, as I've said before, is not just whether you have the right skills, but how you apply them. And that's where the ethical considerations come in, and that's where the notions of trust, and that's where the notion of getting buy-in from the community by having the community have a major say. You know, we have something called co-design where we say, yes, you have to work with the community. But there, in most co-design principles, the designers are still in charge. And I'm saying, no, you have to give up being in charge. You have to be one of many equals. And so the real issue is how we apply the work that we've done. And back to ethics, it's ethics and social responsibility have to be built into the curriculum in all of the material, all of the courses, not just as an isolated course that I'm forced to take. If I'm forced to take an ethics course, I think I may hate it. Why do I want to do this? I want to learn how to do something else. But if it's embedded within all that I do, and I'm being taught, I hope, by building projects in project classes, and they emphasize the ethics of what I'm trying to build, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, at Dyson, the idea is that we have a course on responsibility and design, but also we teach ethics in many other modules, right? So we're trying to incorporate it, but we also want students to spend dedicated time about learning the methods that they could apply, including co-design. And coming to the, with Orient Peters, we did a study a few years ago with Indigenous Australians. And we wanted them to take ownership of their the design process. So we let them choose and plan what design process they wanted to follow. But that's an approach that wouldn't necessarily work in corporations. There's a potential conflict of interest, because that will, when you basically empower them to take over the tool, could be seen in a corporation maybe in a way that it's against their business goals. But you have a lot of experience about convincing management in companies about the benefits for the company on the one hand, and the benefits for the individual on the other. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how those conversations go. What are the best practices to nudge the more senior management, other members of the C-suite, towards ethical behavior, supporting individuals, and so on?
Well, you realize, first of all, you can't just talk about companies in the abstract, because there are very large companies who are mass manufacturing, and they're manufacturing things that will be used by millions of people. And so their requirements are quite different. There you can't just go out and ask people or have them just choose, but you really are going to make one decision or maybe a couple of decisions. You can, of course, you can worry about the ethical issues about where the materials come from and how it's distributed and priced and all of that. But again, you're making devices for large numbers of people. And that's a different problem than if you're a really small company doing something for a relatively small group of people, or if you are just an aid company or a non-government organization trying to help people in a given community. So how you work with these is going to be very different. Now, when it comes to large companies, I have a friend, Amory Lovins, who set up, he's actually well known in the sustainability area. He's written many books and has what's called the Rocky Mountain Institute in the middle of the mountains where it's snowy and cold and freezing. And yet he uses basically no electricity, and he grows bananas, and it's all because he's built his own building to be sustainable and get the energy from the sun and maintain it. But what he has argued is, do not try to convince a company they should do things because it's good for the world. Because you might convince them and they'll even do it, but as soon as there's an economic problem, they'll stop. Yeah. What you have to do is convince them that you can make more money if you do it this way. You see that stuff coming out of your smokestack? That's money. All the black smoke, that's money you're throwing away. You see the stream of waste coming out of your sewers and so on? That's money they're throwing away. So he teaches people how to restructure the manufacturing of the company so that they have less waste and they're more efficient in their usage, or they can reuse stuff over and over again, or that actually trying to introduce something that's more beneficial to the people is a new product line, and you can sell that as this is really beneficial. And so he says, you have to understand, you have to appeal to their reward structure, and a company that's not making a profit goes out of business. So it doesn't matter how great their products or how great their philosophy of life, if they go out of business, it's on. So you have to ensure that they stay in business. So what he recommends, and I think it's the correct philosophy, let's help them do good, but making money while doing it. Enough, you don't have to make outrageous amounts, but enough to keep going and keep everybody employed and maybe expand a little bit in the kinds of work they're doing. So I think that's a very sensible philosophy. If you actually take a look at most companies, the thing that governs a lot of the work that's done is the reward structure. How are you being rewarded for what you do? Now, in the United States, actually in Western Europe as well, one of the evils is the reward structure, because the financial community rewards short-term profits. We have to change that so people reward long-term profits. And so often the general manager or the chief executive officer will do something that increases profits for the short term, but may actually even harm the company. But meanwhile, they get a big bonus and they quit and they leave and they go live comfortably someplace. And the next people have to worry about this, suffer through the problems. We have to change that.
maybe the future then it's having more non-for-profit organizations, no, rather than for-profit.
No, not-for-profit organization still makes a profit. So,
well, but it doesn't go to stakeholders, right? So you don't have to answer to shareholders.
No, but in the end, you have to answer to somebody. So, but the point you're trying to make, the direction you're making, is the right one. But there are other methods. There are beneficial corporations now that are starting that are changing the bylaws so that you are rewarded for the contribution you've made to the community and the people, as opposed to today being rewarded for the amount of money you make quarter after quarter after quarter. You can change the bylaws and change things, but you're correct. That's the nonprofits, in theory, have that philosophy.
Don, I realize it's we are over the time, past the time. I'm looking here at the comments to see if there is questions. There is a lot of hundreds of comments. I'm trying to identify a question or two.
Well, someone says that a design ideology based on profits can't be ethical. No, I don't think that's right. Not profits, but based on rewards. One reward that is really very, very influential is feeling good. If I do something that makes me feel good, that I've done good in the world, that's a reward. So we have to have the appropriate kinds of rewards. Actually doing things for money is the wrong way. If you want to actually get people to do good stuff, don't pay them more money. I mean, you should pay them what they're worth, and you should pay them enough so they live comfortably. But it isn't money that drives people. It's being able to have some control and have some say in what's going on and feeling you've made a difference, a positive difference in the world. That's a great reward.
One other question I would like your opinion about that. I think it's related. It's we see that certain products, digital products in particular, have been, or people are suggesting they're polarizing our society. So on topics like this, we're talking about equity or about sustainability, etc. And society seems to be so polarized, both in the US, in the UK, and many other countries. What can designers do to address this challenge?
I don't know the answer. I do think that we need intelligent people with new points of view. I'm going to look and watch and see what the young group of new designers, as they come into this world, can manage. But the world is, we have some powerful communication technologies today. And whenever a new powerful technology is coming along for communication across the world, people say, oh, wonderful, that will bring world peace and that will make people understand one another. Well, the exact opposite has happened, because what has happened with the internet and with other kinds of new communication devices is you can find people all around the world who believe your point of view, and so you only have to talk to them and learn from them, and you never get to hear other opinions. And that's what's bad, that you never get to hear other opinions. And so that it used to, just take terrorists for a moment, because it used to be there were always people with these weird ideas and who really want to destroy things, but there'd only be a few here and a few there and a few there, and they were too small to make any real difference. But today they can band together and communicate and work as a team, even though they're across the world. And that has given them an unparalleled power. And that's bad, really bad. And it's not obvious how one stops this and changes this appropriately, because, again, different people have different views about what's right or wrong. And some people may want some set of views may be killed because they somehow bother the other group. But we have to be, it's a very difficult issue, very, very difficult. And you're right, the amount of, the lack of faith in people with some real knowledge, what we call, falsehoods, understanding of truth, the importance of real evidence as opposed to things that are made up, that's sort of disappearing, and that's dangerous.
Don Ide talks about different human-machine type of interactions, and one of them is hermeneutics, how technology interprets the world that we see outside. And I think in some cases that's what's happening. The tools that we are using that mediate our experience of the outside world, maybe it's polarized, it's contributed to that polarization. No? So
Absolutely, but you have to remember technology is anything made by humans, and we've had technology since the beginning. So some of the earliest technologies were for cooking and making fire, but also for killing animals for food. And that killing animals also translates into killing strangers, because people work together in small groups and small societies, but tend to be opposed. This is historical. I mean, over tens of thousands of years, are opposed to other groups that are using the same territory. You see this in animals too. It isn't restricted to people. But our technology has allowed us to build spears and bows and arrows and catapults and firepower, rifles, cannons, and that has controlled a lot about the way society is developed. So different societies develop differently depending upon the technologies they had developed for themselves to live with. So it's an old problem. It's new technologies bringing in new problems. But the fact that technology often shapes us in ways that are unexpected, that we don't really care for, is old.
So you think what they call the fourth industrial revolution is just one more iteration, and there's nothing qualitatively different to the previous ones?
But here's what I hope is qualitatively different. In fact, it's what we sort of talked about before, the large companies who have to make making one device for everybody around the world. Well, we have now flexible manufacturing. We might be able to do what is called mass customization. We might be able to make a different product for everybody, because as long as the machines are more automated, and this is a good thing in this case, they are able to actually adopt themselves to make a different thing for each device coming down the line. We've already seen that in automobiles. That is, if you look at the automobile line, they're not the same automobile coming down the line. They even be different brands within the same manufacturer. But this one's red, this one's blue, this one has this kind of seats, this one has a different kind of seats, this one has a different engine, this one has different wheels. We're all down the line. It's actually, if you talk to the workers in the line, one of the skills they have to learn is, as the next car comes down the line, they have to figure out which one it is, so which water pump they're going to put on, or what tool they need to adjust the wheels or the engine or whatever, because they are different. They're still customized, though, within a range of things, but I believe that the range of customization will change and change and change, especially when we start doing what's called additive manufacturing. 3D printing is an example, which is right now, it's very slow and expensive, but it's still being used for lots of real products. It's being used more and more in a dentist's office to make a crown. It's being done making prosthetics. It's being done in surgery, and it's being done in making jewelry, and it's in airplanes. The rotors of jet engines are being made by additive manufacturing, because you can make those things. They can be lighter and stronger and cheaper when made by the additive manufacturing than when made by conventional methods. But that also means each one can be different, because it's just a matter of programming. You just change the program and whoop, it's a different part. So I think maybe what we'll have is a lot more modular, and therefore specialization, and therefore customization, that maybe people can actually get exactly what they need, not what the manufacturer insists they must buy.
Some people have argued there are pros and cons with every technology, obviously, and with these new additive manufacturing approaches, this could have a huge impact on low and medium income countries like Argentina, Venezuela, and so forth, and Brazil, where a lot of the manufacturing happens, and this could change that the politics and the economics. No? So the customization factory will be placed in the US. So rather than in, let's say, Brazil or China. That might benefit certain countries more than others. Have you thought about that, the geopolitics of how this could pan out?
Yeah, it is complex, but you know, it's interesting when you look at geopolitics. What is a country? A country is an artificial boundary, and countries are not that old. The concept of country is only a couple hundred years old in many places, and a lot of them are. If you take a look at the African countries, the lines were done by the Belgians. The Europeans decided where the boundaries were in African countries, and that's crazy. So you split tribes that live together, they're suddenly in different countries. And the same thing happens in the Middle East, and the same thing happens, for that matter, look at South America, when the Pope decided that here's a line, and this is Portuguese, and this other, and the stuff to the west is Spanish. And so the Portuguese ended up with Brazil, and everything else is Spanish. And it's kind of bizarre and unnecessary. And a lot of feuds take place in these countries over the arbitrariness of the boundary lines. So maybe it will change. Now, I have a science fiction author who's a friend. I think science fiction authors, by the way, is where I get a lot of my understanding, because to be a good science fiction author, first of all, you have to really understand the role of technology and in people, and you have to make up a scenario where you show how that plays out in real life. And so, you know, Kim Stanley Robinson is one of my favorites now, who writes about, well, the last book was The Ministry of the Future, about how we might deal with the climate crisis. But the other one, it was a book called, I think it was Islands in the Sun by, I just lost my friend's name. But where he said that the countries were very unimportant, it was the companies that ruled you. When you asked your citizenship, you named the company you worked for, because the companies dominated. And many large companies, by the way, are much more powerful than most nations. And I'm not saying that was a good thing. I'm just saying that that's another possibility, because you have to realize that almost everything that governs our lives is artificial, invented by people. Money was invented by people. The economic system invented by people. Governments were invented by people. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be other ways. Except once something has been in place for hundreds of years, it is difficult to change. But if you look at the history of the world, of the rise and fall of empires all across Asia and Europe, and then especially Northern Africa, things do change. The empire lasts for a couple hundred years, which for a person is a long time, but for the world, relatively short. And then it gets replaced by yet another empire, a different empire. And it has been a very dynamic state. And maybe we're reaching the point when it seems kind of chaotic. Chaos often announces a major change is happening.
Yeah, it is true that the world is changing very fast, but the countries that are poor have been poor for centuries. The countries that are rich have been rich. So the colonization aspect that you mentioned before.
But that's why the countries that are poor stayed poor, because they were used as resources for either the minerals in the country, in the land, or for the people as slaves and cheap labor. Yeah.
I'm looking if there are more questions from the audience, but I know we are half an hour over the original. I could keep talking with you, Don, for hours.
Just how India and Pakistan was divided. Yep, that was it. That was divided on religious grounds and political grounds, but it made no sense to divide it.
Well, I think to close, Don, maybe is there one message that you have that you want to highlight a little bit more before we close down on how universities and how design education should move forward, so our alumni, our graduates, create a better world. No, you're writing a book about supporting well-being, I think. So how can we pass this on to our students?
It may be more up to the students than to the professors. Have a different point of view. But the other thing is that the university system is bizarre. It is really strange that we think we can go to school up to age mid-20s or something, and then we know everything that we need to know for the rest of our lives. And on worse, as you go through all the different years of schooling, it's tedious and difficult. And maybe we ought to be allowed to quit and come back. And maybe what I really think is that education ought to be more modular. First of all, it shouldn't stop. You should be learning all of the time. And so universities ought to have a new business, which is not, I only take full-time students who are going to be here for whatever number of years. But I offer this wonderful course and anybody can come and take it. And so throughout your life, when you feel there's something new happening, what's this fourth revolution in manufacturing? I don't know what you mean. I go take a course in it. And when I learn of some new field, I think it might be interesting. I can take a course, a good course, and therefore the university could just be forever allowing people to come in and take the course and go away, and may not even have grades. But how about certificates? I like modules where there's small modules, and you can take an exam maybe, but you either pass or you don't pass. If you don't pass, you don't have to tell anybody. If you do pass, you can say, I have a certificate in this particular material or this particular piece of knowledge. I think we have to change the way people are being taught. And the other thing is, in most fields, teachers think that you're supposed to teach by giving lectures. And there's one thing we really know about education, and that the world's worst way to learn is through lectures. Lectures are really good at motivating, at giving an overview of a field. I like to think that what I'm doing right now is motivational. But if you really want to learn something, you have to do it. You have to be involved in a project. And universities insist that you do it all by yourself. Well, if we do it in a group, how do we know how much each person contributed? But everything in the world is done by groups of people. In fact, larger and larger groups. You have to learn how to work with the groups and learn to work with people with very different opinions who maybe you have been trained. I was trained as a mechanical engineer. I was trained as a physicist. I was trained as an artist. I was trained as a designer. I was trained as an economist. How do you work together in a team so that you actually can produce something that's wonderful and cohesive? That's what we should be training for. But in many ways, it's up to you, the students, who are going to be the future of the world.
Thank you, Don. I think that's a fantastic place to finish for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience.
Bye, everyone.